Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Joey, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me from sunny LA.
Yeah, my birthplace. I was actually born in Inglewood / Culver City, but grew up on the East Coast.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
bounced back and forth. And where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I'm an East Coaster as well. I relocated to LA in early 2022 to what I call escape the East Coast. No fault to the East Coast, but I was in Washington, D.C. for the predominant part of my adult life. Though I grew up in the backwoods of West Virginia and lived in North Carolina for a while as well. So I know the East Coast from a lot of perspectives, but the bulk of my experience has been in Washington, D.C. And when I jokingly say escape, I'm a creative. And D.C., I made a creative career work there, but I think we could all agree the city is really driven by politics and it's a bit uptight. And I was craving something different. So I picked up and moved across the country for the beautiful sun, beautiful weather, and to be around creative people. And so I've gotten all of those things here.
Yeah, no, you don't have to be diplomatic with me about DC. I'm also a DC kid. I grew up in the Beltway, and in some ways I miss it. I miss the landscape. I miss how pretty it is.
Right.
But yeah, if you go to a party, you go out to dinner with people or whatever, people are like one of four jobs, right? It's lobbyist, it's NGO, it's government, it's contractor, et cetera. So definitely know the vibe. But yeah, to kind of bring this to what you're doing now, for those that don't know you, would you mind talking a bit about your background and your experience in the agency world?
Yeah, definitely, Dan. I'm glad to bring my experience to bear for your audience. I've been in the space for over 20 years. I look younger than I am. So I've been working in creative from the very beginning, but I actually started out in journalism. I never formally worked in it much more than maybe 1 year out of college. But the interesting thing is I started off through the lens of telling stories with words. And back then, of course, it was on video and Betamax tape and all that. But the same idea was it's like the pre-days of YouTube. And so I really got into it because I wanted to tell stories, both visually, but also documenting things. And then when I actually took a class in the journalism program on layout and design, I realized I like design better than news. And I realized that the path to become an Oprah or somebody that actually can do commentary takes decades, and I didn't want to do that. So I realized that I liked the creative side of things better. You could spin things. It was about telling illustrative stories and fictitious stories and things like that. So that's how I got into creative, and I've been practicing that ever since. So I actually worked up the ranks to be a creative director, managing director of creative, super senior C-suite creative roles toward my more recent years in the creative space. But I started off as a designer. And I think that's really important to note because as we're speaking to agency owners, a lot of us come up in different ways. Some people pop into creative and they didn't necessarily work in it. They're managing it from kind of the theory and the understanding of the business side, but they're not a true doer or a maker of that creative work. There's no fault in that. That's good. But I'm coming from that lens of I understand the grind. I was a junior designer and I was promoted and I got some really great opportunities. And I learned some of the things we're going to talk about today, things that I had to learn on my own, frankly, because there's not a lot of good mentorship in the creative space, especially the jobs are so busy that, no one's really training you necessarily on the right path to get promoted. And so what I did was I just figured a lot of it out and realized that I was super passionate about passing that stuff back and mentoring based on understanding in the agency world what it takes to actually be a creative strategist, a designer, a video producer, things like that. So that's my management style when we look at, no matter how senior I've gotten in the creative space, I'm definitely always thinking about the product and thinking about how to motivate the creatives. So that's kind of a short of what I'm doing now. I more recently have left that full-time agency space and I'm back on my own doing bespoke creative work because I was craving that entrepreneurial bug was biting again. And so I've been doing that now. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but specifically, I'm also doing training and coaching for other creatives. So through the lens of helping them be effective communicators, doing trainings for other agency teams. So I'm kind of in both camps at this point. So it's a super exciting space to be in.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with me and my background. I kind of had a creative bend in college and studied music and stuff, but then my first sales job was selling basically high-end animated video. So this would have been like commercial work and explainer videos and that kind of thing. And it depends on who we were talking to, but a lot of the times we were selling to like tech startups in the 2010s, during like the kind of boom of evaluations. And we did well, but then like when we would get objections, it was sort of just like, what makes this better than the $1,200 or the $1,000 video I can get in the Philippines or whatever?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, there wasn't, you could like do an expensive A/B test and do all this stuff and try to compare them. But really, like, that's not realistic. And we had to get to the point of just saying, like, well, if you don't see the difference, then we're not for you, that's kind of what it comes down to, with creative. And since then, more recent months, I don't want to make this an AI conversation because we've had enough of those, but like, maybe we can go there. We've had this influx of AI based creativity and all this stuff, and it just seems to be getting like more and more flooded with cheap or free alternatives to create when it comes to digital creative, let's say. So hopefully I can bring this to a question, I guess, like, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, it actually brings up a couple points because I do have a frame of reference on the AI conversation. I do believe it's a bigger one than just AI. I think I've been in the industry long enough that we've seen certain things come and go. I think AI is not going anywhere, but there have been big groundbreaking changes. Like I mentioned earlier, when I started in journalism, we were on tape and everything was much slower and live feeds were harder. And now that's changed forever, right? We do streaming video. So that's something that changed and never went backward. And I think that is huge because that was a huge revolution in that space. And I think AI is a huge revolution now. But one of the things that comes to mind for me, which gets to even my view of what I think makes a really great agency, what makes a really great consultant in an agency, because I know some of your listeners may be one-off agencies where it's just themselves working, but I know a lot of your agency owners are probably managing teams of people as well, which is even more important there. The human factor is here. And I fundamentally believe, having worked in consulting for this many years, and I see it, I present to clients, I've done thousands of presentations, in boardrooms, and it's just part of what we do. All your listeners are going to know that. People want human connection. They really do. And I'm not saying that we don't want that computer, that robot at the table, though I just feel that at some point clients may get on board with that for a while, but they're always going to come back to being compelled and persuaded by another human over a robot, right? And so I think if we figure out where the robot lives in the whole conversation or the AI experience, then it can really help us kind of accentuate that human connection. But I just do believe that, because I think at some point when we're like us talking now, AI can augment what we do, but it's not giving us the same level of human connection that I think we all crave. And I believe there's a space for that will always be true in the agency world, and specifically in selling the ideas to other people. I just believe it's much better coming from a human. So I see AI augmenting that process. I don't think it's going to overtake, but I think that's the fear everyone has. It's like, is it going to overtake? Is it going to really replace me? I don't see that replacing a sales pitch. I see it augmenting.
Yeah, and there's almost this kind of like bottleneck for that reason. I wonder about where it's like we hear all these stats about all these jobs that are going to get replaced by AI and on the back end, like on the operational side, and that's probably true in a lot of areas. But then the thing that's fueling all of the operational back end processes is business being closed, and that's where there's this bottleneck, because like if you're spending more than roughly $1,000, you're going to want a human, right? And that could change down the road, but it's really hard to imagine that changing. Like it might take a whole other generation of human to be born in order to get used to that. Because like anyone, millennial, even Gen Z, if you want to spend more than $1,000, especially not to mention hundreds of thousands of your company's money, right, that could have serious career implications, there's going to be humans involved in that. And it's hard to imagine, even if the AI gets really good, it's hard to imagine that habit dying anytime soon. So anyway, I go back and forth. I'm not hand waving AI away, but that's a few things I think of.
It's important, but I think, as I said, it's a bigger conversation. And my view, as I've just shared, which is what I think is the secret sauce of the agency world, and having built teams of people and managed people myself, when people are thriving, in my experience, in the creative space, and not just creatives, but in the idea world that all of our agencies work in, we're selling ideas, we're selling visions and future states to people. I'm presuming all your agencies are there. There's, even if it's technology or SaaS product or whatever, we're selling hope of a future state that's better than where we are. And I believe it's so much easier for humans to bring the empathy and guide the person to that place. It's just going to be much harder for a robot to say, this is going to work because I experienced it, but because the robot doesn't have emotions, right? And I think that's the feeling of, and what I do see, and I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, because you would clearly work in the space too. Emotion is so central to the buying process. As much as we try to scrub it out, especially when you get into creative work, strategy, video, idea selling, all those things. What really pushes people over the edge, without me quoting a lot of statistics, they do exist, is that emotion. You can present fact all day long, but the idea is like looking someone in the eye and saying, this new website is going to work. And here's why. Because
Yeah.
I experienced it, right? Or we experienced this before. Or even, I'm sure you work with clients too, where it's like, just you saying it with your background of experience is enough for them to
Well,
from a human view, believe you,
I'll bring it to today, and I think the big challenge that we're coaching a lot of clients through, especially now, is like, hey, we've gone through the motions with this prospect, and we've present these proposals, and we've gotten this far in the process, and they've ghosted us, which is always a thing that can happen, but it's
Yeah.
happening more now because recession and blah 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 and all this stuff. So then what I find that people want from me and our team in the coaching process is some sort of tactical change that's going to make everything better. And I shouldn't just say that. It's not that there couldn't be that. It's more that they want some way to like redo their proposal, or something where if we shift it around and we have this piece of information here instead of there, it's going to change everything. But the reality is they're not finding that, like you said, emotion. They're not finding or uncovering that pain early enough, and it never was there, and it never was going to be there. So
Right.
the problem was there wasn't going to be some combination of words or presentation that they could have said that would have changed this person's mind. Maybe,
Yeah.
but that's a lot hard. That's very hard. The problem is that they wasted all this time and energy on somebody that wasn't worth wasting that time and energy on. Right. And that
Yeah.
just goes to back to what you originally said, the emotion, and asking the questions like, how do you feel about this? What happens
Right.
if you do nothing? What happens if you stay the course? You tell me you want to do this. Are you making similar investments? If so, for how long? Like getting to
Yeah.
why should you do this now? Right. And go
Right.
through that.
Right.
So anyway, I guess to bring that to a question, how do you decide what pitches to swing at? How do you instruct your creatives to find the right opportunities, basically?
Yeah, and that's a good question because I've had experience doing it at larger agencies, smaller one-off agencies, doing them myself as a smaller agency, doing bespoke projects. I think it's the same number of things that you're looking at. I think the risks are honestly greater when you are smaller because you do have much more contact with that person that you're working with, and you don't have the infrastructure in place to support something that might go poorly, or the risk mitigation is just so much more important. But I do believe that having stuff documented is really key. So some of the questions that I've looked at, no matter what agency I'm working at, a couple things. One is you don't want to work on something that's not achieving one of these few things. So one would be, is it making us money? I mean, that's the first one. I think we don't even need to talk about that. Like, is the profit margin there? I think that's good in understanding the risk. But I think a lot of times sales teams stop there. They're like, okay, it meets the criteria, profit loss, we're great. But one of the challenges is, as an agency, especially if you're doing work that's more custom, like a creative idea, strategy, all those things, you've got to actually make the thing. And so your team has to get emotionally invested to some level to deliver this thing. So I think adding on a few other metrics are important, or checkpoints, which is this adding to our portfolio in a way that's significant? So if the money's not there, then that you definitely need to be checking this box. Is it adding to our portfolio? Is it showing a new piece of work that we really want to be showing, a new expertise, right? Is it a new client brand name that we really like? I think that's a big piece. I like to look at both of those side by side, and hopefully both boxes are checked, but if only one is checked, that's okay. And then beyond that, if you're working with the team, or even if it's yourself and you're delivering the work as the agency owner yourself, do we want to do this work? Do we agree with it? Do we like it? Do we want to align with this brand? Do we want to align with this cause or this issue? Those things I think are big and important. And honestly, those things are often the thing, as the agency gets larger, in my experience, that gets completely forgotten. And that is what really impacts morale. And that's what impacts churn, creative turnover, or whatever, because creatives, and I'm using the word creative loosely here, I'm not even just talking about visual designers. I'm talking about anyone that's really dreaming up an idea and using the problem solving part of their brain. So they're coming up with unique ideas and things like that. So it could include project managers, account managers, strategists, all that. That is defeating when it's something you're not excited about, or when the client's cause is really problematic, or the client themselves are difficult and they don't want to go to that place. And now this team is on this project for 6 months. It's a huge problem, and I think juggling that as an agency owner is really important. And I know sometimes we don't feel that we have that luxury, but I think it's kind of the idea of, I know that you talk about this some too, or you think about this with your work. If someone's spinning something up, growing an agency, scaling an agency, you want to start scaling from the beginning with the plan in mind. You don't want to add in this concept later, right? And so my thought is, it's like, well, why not just kind of try to make the right projects from the beginning, treat the team well from the beginning. So as you scale, you actually have happy staff because happy staff turns into happy client. I see this so much when I look at all the agencies I've been part of. When we look at the client satisfaction scores, when we look at the net promoter scores and all those things that a lot of agencies use, they go up when the staff are happy. They go up when the clients are happy. And sometimes it's even a perception of happiness. It's a feeling of like, you can turn a project around really quickly by just getting those humans in there and getting this like energy high, right? And I think so that can be really tanked if the project is not something the team's excited about, or worse, if they just really hate it.
And there's a few other things I want to dig into related to that, but I think that's a really good point. And I've heard that the buzzword is kind of like vertical alignment. And you hear a lot about this in the context of like planning your life and everything, where it's like, okay, I want to make this much money and you have this career success, but if you don't plan that alongside everything else in your life, then you're going to end up out of whack and unhappy, right? So I think that's, you can do that on a team or company level as well. And it makes a lot of sense. I also think that so much of the time companies lose, especially B2B situations, lose the emotional element of this and how much that matters, right? We fool ourselves a lot more. But I think you've identified how to find the right fit client. But the word pitch is a controversial one, right? I think that can mean anything. It can mean used car, it can mean creative, it can mean Mad Men. It could be something that a lot of people are allergic to. Great writers like Blair Enns, he's the book Win Without Pitching. I guess, like, what's your definition of pitch? And what does it take for somebody to earn the right to be pitched based on that?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's a good point. Pitching is a word that is more true at the larger agency level, right? People use that word in that space where it is a formal meeting. It's usually a structured event. It's an actual thing. But then the pitching concept, or like the action of pitching, is more loose. I actually use the word presentation more commonly, or selling, frankly, selling an idea, casting vision. I think those things are all part of the pitching process. And I think when you're looking at the client process, obviously those bigger projects where a pitch is built in, when you've earned the right because you've been brought in, obviously, to pitch that room. I think when it's projects where the pipeline is different, I know a lot of agencies are adopting the newer pipeline that's driven through content creation and bringing people through funnels and things like that. I believe you do earn that right, when someone does get on a call with you, but I still think it's a dialogue. That's the key. I believe, as I've done any pitch training, and I've done those recently, I created a curriculum called the Creative Pitch Masterclass that goes into this, that takes all the agency learnings that I've seen and brings it to bear. And I can tell you the three parts of that will make sense here, which is the first piece of that masterclass is thinking like your client. It doesn't even start talking about how you pitch or what you say or what your agency is good at. The whole first module is thinking like your client, because if you don't understand them, you have no idea what to say, and the empathy doesn't come across. So it's this whole deep curriculum asking questions about, what does their board care about? What do their managers care about? What keeps them up at night? Questions like this that I have in this full guide. And that's groundbreaking for people, because when they start to see that, especially younger creatives, younger agency professionals, don't get trained that in school. They come in and think, I'm just making the thing. I'm thinking all about us. I'm not thinking about you, the client. And I think that's huge. So thinking like the client is big. And then the next phase of that module is connecting the dots to those pain points, right? And I think when you speak to their pain points in that first meeting, so if it's a sales call for an agency that's doing a more non-traditional way, or if it's a formal pitch meeting, I think what's most important, and I say this in the training, just because you are in the room does not mean you have earned the right for them to listen to you. You have to earn the right for them to pay attention when you're in the room. And that's two important factors. Just because you were brought in doesn't mean they like you, doesn't mean they care, doesn't mean they're going to hire you. The winning over process starts in the actual pitch meetings, or a series of pitch meetings. And you know what? They don't stop either. I believe the pitching continues to happen, honestly, throughout the process of a delivery of a product or a strategy. because clients' trust is constantly being built in those things, and it can be depleted really quickly. So though the pitching looks different when you're delivering a website concept way later, or when you're delivering a sales strategy, like in your case, or things like that, but you have the opportunity every moment you're in front of them to sell them on an idea. So the selling just looks different in those later stages. It's not as splashy, but in the words you're using, it's all about trust building. It's all about empathy. So I think to answer your question, I think those are the mechanics of how I think about it. But what I like to train people on is it's the headspace of you going into that meeting with the client. So I like to go into client meetings. What I do, a strategy that I do and train my team on, is it's almost like a meditation where you don't run around frazzled. You come into the meeting, and the minute before it starts, closing your eyes, bringing up a document. If you have it, I encourage my teams to have those questions I just told you, to have those answered. It's almost like a manifesto of the project or a primer. Read it. And it says, the client's scared about this. They're scared it's going to break. They got burned before, because we forget that stuff, especially if we're working on a lot of projects. And then now you come on the call, Dan, we're talking on a project. Now it's fresh. I'm clear. I'm focused on you. And I think that stuff goes a long way, because then I've earned the right to pitch you, because I'm actually paying attention to what you care about. And I'm not talking at you. I'm talking with you. You're right. It's a dialogue. So those are just some big ideas. Hopefully there's some nuggets in there people can adapt, but I'm happy to go into more of those in detail if you'd like to. So it's a mindset thing, and then it's a tactical thing.
Yeah, that's really great. And let's get a little more tactical. Like, what does that process look like, that sequence of calls? It's not
Yeah.
unlike, the sales processes we work with for our clients and ourselves. And honestly, like, it's funny because we've been at this since 2014, longer in previous lives, and we're still optimizing and changing the sales process. And like,
Yeah.
it's funny, after all these years, we'll go back and look like, you know what? Like, our close rate was a lot better a year ago.
Mhm.
And we changed it for reasons that we can't remember and don't understand. And
Right.
or there was a condition that was in play then that's no longer in play. Like, there was something that we couldn't promise then that we can promise now, et cetera. And it's like, and then we go back to it again. And for us, what that's meant is we used to just get off a process that probably wasn't working as well, where we'd give away everything on the first call and then not
Yep.
convert to the second. So now we're going back to the old process where we ask a whole lot of questions
Yeah.
before we share that much. And then the second call is more about the sharing, which is more conventional and normal. And there's a reason why that's often best practice. So yeah, let
Right.
me bring
Right.
this to you and what you're doing.
Yeah, and I kind of have two schools of thought, because I think there's a different approach depending on if you're doing that more traditional agency model where you're responding to RFPs and you're kind of going through this more structured format. So maybe I'll just touch on that at the end, because I think what you're getting at is what I think is more interesting, which is this pipeline focus where people are either bringing people through a conversion piece of content online or a YouTube video or something like that, and they're ending up in a sales call and a series of things like that, where the pitch is not this big boardroom of people. In fact, it might even be one or two people. And I think that's really exciting, because that is much more tailored, frankly, for that conversation that I'm talking about. You can make it work in a big boardroom, but it still feels like a structured, splashy presentation. But the key with both of those is, I think the tactics are, you have to make it feel like it's personal, and you really are speaking to them directly, no matter how many people are on that call. And I think that's really big and important. And I bring it up to say, a lot of people forget this, because we get very busy, we get stressed out. And especially if there's a lot of pressure on this particular conversion, winning this client, we start talking about ourselves. We start talking about what we think the problem is, how we think they should feel, and things like that. And I believe it's a dance that you have to play there. So I think, like you mentioned, asking questions in the beginning is really big. And I think tactically that's a great way to do it. Even if you're in a big boardroom, for example, often starting off the meeting saying, and when I say a boardroom, it could be a Zoom as well, where you have multiple people that are buyers on a call, asking questions. What do you see this being like? What does the future state look like? When we're successful, what has changed? And honestly, even big rooms have answered those questions. And that's a really powerful one. It sounds simple, but I always like to start with that. What does it look like? What does your future state look like? Because then they're starting to help you paint the transition, the journey. Where are we going? Because we're really guiding them there as a consultant. So I want to know what you think the top of that mountain looks like that we're getting ready to climb together, because it's going to be a big, long hike, and we can take a bunch of different routes to get there. It's going to be hard. And I want to make sure that you are bought in on the top of the pinnacle moment. What does it look like on top? And I want to hear in their words what they think it's going to look like, and I think that's really big. So that's one question that I like to start with, that could work even in a one-on-one conversation or in a big meeting as well. So tactically, there's that. I know sometimes people have multiple sales calls, and I believe the most important ones are not only the first one where you meet and greet. So I know a lot of times people will do a call where it's more of a strategy session or something like that, where it's not a sales call at all. You can start to learn a lot of the answers to the questions I mentioned earlier there, what they care about, what's keeping them up at night, those kinds of things. And then I think that next meeting is often the pitch, where you're pitching them on the idea, whether that's a big boardroom or whether that's a one-on-one like us now. And I think there, then you can bring those things back. And now you're able to start connecting those dots from your solution to what they said. And I think that's the key. So no matter how big the room is, tactically, what that means is, like, what I often say is, we talked in the beginning that you tried to create a website with another vendor and it really didn't go well. Because of that, here are a couple things that we've seen work really well, for example, right? And now you're framing it through the lens that I clearly heard your pain and I'm also empathizing with your pain, and I'm now telling you how we're going to solve it. I think that structure can work in any setting. So that hopefully is a tactical tip people can use today. Just always remembering that structure rather than talking at them and saying, this is how we would solve it. Do you want to do it? Well, they may not understand, especially as it gets more emotional and they have pain. The pain is there. And I mean, I know we're speaking generically today because there's a lot of listeners, and I know some of the products people are selling are more transactional than others, but still people have an emotional investment in this. And they may be doubting if the solution is actually going to work for them. And I think we have to speak to that doubt early on.
Let's face it, building proposals is a pain for most agencies. It drains your time and energy, and the fear of putting in all that effort only to be ghosted by prospects is real. But what if I told you there's a better way? Introducing Smart Pricing Table, the game-changing interactive proposal software designed specifically for agencies like yours. Developed by a former agency owner, their powerful tool cuts down on the back and forth, incorporates upsells seamlessly, and lets you build proposals at lightning speed. No more grinding it out and leaving money on the table. It's time to create a repeatable system where your prospects can upsell themselves. Learn more at smartpricingtable.com/DAG and schedule a demo today.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a lot of different tactical particulars we could jump into depending on the situation. I think one thing that comes up a lot across the board is this idea of timing. Like we do a lot of outreach for clients. We're really good about getting people meetings, but at the end of the day, we can reach out to a company and they could say, yes, this is interesting, I want to take the meeting. But it's not like there's a magic wand anyone can wave to make that company be like, here, agency, I just met you, here's $100,000 for the website, right? So with the clients that you're working with, the ones that are able to make engagements happen, able to make stuff happen, even if it's a smaller limited engagement, like, what are they doing differently? Is there a product or service that your better clients have developed that is a good lead in that you can talk about for making stuff happen?
Yeah. And when you say making stuff happen, are you thinking more like creating a sale more quickly or converting people more quickly?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, there is a client that I'm working with now. It's a SaaS product, and that's exactly what we're doing. It still is a pitching process, but it's small groups, and so they're pitching this product to universities that deal with donor engagement. And so it's a product, but the secret sauce for this product is the customer service. It's huge. I mean, they're hands-on. It's almost like a mixture of strategy meets product meets SaaS product. It's great. And so anyway, they're pitching, they're coming in and doing keynote presentations. And we've really been perfecting that and playing with the order of things, how that works, what we lead with, what we don't, how we deal with questions early versus not. But it's still a formal presentation where slides are being popped up. But what we did is we actually have weaved in complete stories in there. So nothing is explained in a way that is tactical or boring. It's all very illustrative. So for example, it might be you deal with this problem where you need to gather all these quotes from people and you need to do it quickly and you need to make sure they're accurate and you need to attribute them to the right students or whatever that are using that are getting recipients of these donors gifts. So therefore, the solution makes that literally automated, right? And so rather than saying we do automated surveys, that's powerful, but it's really powerful when you say you now are gathering endless videos on your own without doing anything from the user themselves into their iPhone onto the platform. They're tagged and organized in a way, right? That now you feel it as a user because you're thinking that's so much saved time. So the message there is saving time, efficiency, accuracy, less proofing, less losing of things, right? And so I think we're speaking to the pain points in that exact narrative. So that's often how that's an example of this particular client and how they're achieving that, and it's working well. And then we just tweak it accordingly. So we just look back at the videos of all the sales calls, their Zoom calls like this, and we actually tweak them every time based on what worked and what didn't. We look at the people's faces, we see what reaction they had, we look at the questions, and we literally pivot based on that. And it works, and it's starting to shorten that sales cycle in a significant way because the pain points are being spoken to more quickly, and also the vision is being cast. The people understand what this product does much more quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then I think, a lot of the times I go negative to ask questions because it's sometimes easier to find examples of what to stop doing than it is to figure out what you should do. Like, maybe you or I are not electricians and we wouldn't know how to wire a house.
I am not an electrician.
But if we, nor am I, but if we saw, a giant pile of wires with sparks coming from it, we'd probably say that's probably not very good wiring, right? So I guess with that, when agency creative is communicated badly, what does that usually look like? Like, how is that usually playing out in a status quo situation?
Yeah. And when you say it's communicated badly, are you thinking, do you want me to answer specifically about how it's being presented to a client, more that, or selling the actual process of doing creative?
I think more so the former, but maybe the latter too.
Well, they kind of both interrelate. And I think I say this a lot in all the trainings I do and with all the people I've managed, that we all got into the agency space, I think. I don't want to speak for all your audience members, but especially those that are making ideas and putting out strategies. We got into this space because we actually want to help people. I think we're all problem solvers intrinsically, especially if you came up through the ranks in an agency, right? You do a thing, you make a thing, and now we created an agency about the thing we want to do. So we like the actual action of solving problems. And that's important. Though I think the kind of the bitter reality that I had earlier on in my career that no one taught me was when I realized that I'm over here focused on graphic design and no one really cares unless the client buys it. And no one really cares unless the client is retained. And no one really cares if the client's upset and hates it all. They don't care about design theory. They don't care about font, color palettes, whatever, unless the client likes it and wants more of it. That's ultimately what the agency is driven by, to be very honest. So I come in with that business acumen already in place, and I often have onboarded younger creatives and younger strategists doing this kind of in a whiteboard session where I walk them through and say, why does this person buy this thing? Why do they continue to hire us? Because they believe it's going to help them solve their problem. So we want to do the thing, and we want to stay up night and like make the thing and whatever. If you're a writer, you want to write the thing, you want to design the thing, you want to do the thing. I'm not saying we don't want to do really quality work, but it's almost equally important, if not more important, to sell it the right way. Because if you don't explain it to the client in a way where they get it, it ends up on that place no one wants it to end up, on the cutting room floor where every idea went to die. That idea where we always think, God, why didn't they do the cool thing? And they didn't do that. They did the safe thing. So I think if we can remember that clients ultimately want to stay safe in most cases, especially if you're selling them on something new, and they're going to fight for that at all costs. And I think you have to remember that going in, that even sometimes like meeting 3, if you're presenting a strategy or a big proposal or an idea to them, they're still not bought into it yet. And they're still craving to stay safe. And so I think that's really important because, you may have seen this as well in what you do. You pitch something really big and exciting. They're excited about it that moment. And then they think about it for 5 days, or they talk to their team, and now they're scared of it. And now they want to do a fraction of what they can do. And now no one's happy because they're not winning. They could excel more. They could make more money, but they're just frankly scared to death of it. And I think it's our job as guides to convince them that actually, no, let's keep hiking, because when we get to the top of the mountain, it's going to be amazing. Even though you're scared to death of it and you've never done this hike, I think we have to think of it in terms of that and sell them on that. And it's really every day, every check-in, every meeting. This does not stop in one meeting. A lot of agencies think it's that big sales pitch. They think it's that big first reveal of a product. It's the iPhone launch. Sure, those are big. But where the real magic happens is in the project manager check-ins, the one-off drop-ins, the reminding them of the quality of it in a Slack channel message later in the week. It's those little things that say, remember, we're going to a cool place. That's great, and so I think that's important on selling.
What we found, and we're not exactly in a creative space, but it's heavily creative because it's based on copywriting at the end of the day, is
Totally.
that a lot of it is just about telling people exactly what's going to happen and
Yeah.
what you need to be successful. So that there's no wiggle room, from that
Yeah.
for later. Because ultimately, if you don't have it your way and the client ends up running the process, you won't be successful either, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of that going on as well, so that there's
Yeah.
not too many surprises. There can be risks, but not surprises, basically.
Yeah. And I could share a tactical step here if that's helpful for
Sure.
users, because I know we're talking in theory and lifting from some of the trainings that I mentioned earlier, specifically the Creative Pitch Masterclass. What I explain in there is how to stage the conversation delivery so that it builds in the appropriate amount of drama and risk without overdoing it. And so the structure, I know we're not looking at visuals, but I can kind of explain it in sequence. The structure is more in the beginning, you want to state that future state. You want to get that written in a really succinct way so that your team knows it. And you can say that future state over and over and over in meetings without sounding completely rote. So it might be, for example, you remind them even on a project management check-in, that future state as well. So we're really excited that this new sales strategy is going to triple the amount of conversions that you have. And then when you get there, then the cool thing is you're also going to have really happy clients and whatever. So you're kind of connecting like a tactical thing with a visionary thing, whatever it is, get a statement written up that is the future state. And I think get your team to know it and keep bringing it up. I think starting there is key because it reminds them where they're going. And then also reminding them of the drama in some delicate way. And so what I mean by that is the drama could mean, what happens if this doesn't work? You stay status quo. Remember, we don't want to stay here. We're trying to mitigate against this risk. We're going to fix this problem so you make more money. You kind of always delicately remind them of what they won't get if they don't go there. And that could be done in conversation as well. And often I will recommend that being framed before you go into revealing something. So if you're in like a meeting where you're presenting something, you sort of say that in the beginning. You say, what we're going to show you today is really exciting because it's a 3-part strategy that's going to revolutionize your sales strategy. So it's 3 parts. And the reason we did it in this way is because we know that the risk is that if you don't do anything, you're going to lose market share. I'm just making this up, but you remind them of that again. And because we know that we don't want you to lose market share, therefore we're going to do these things. And so you almost frame it through the lens of the drama. And it's like classic storytelling, which is what I talk about in this training. I go through and talk about scripts, and I look at The Wizard of Oz and Titanic and other classic movies, and like the character and this term called armature, which is like the big idea of the story. Point is that works in sales as well. That works. People want the threat. They want to remember the threat, and then you show them how they can get out of the threat. So those are some of the tactical things that I think you can do. So the structure is future state, remind them delicately of the drama of what could happen if they don't do it, and then framing those solutions through the lens of that future state and that drama, right? And so it could be 1, 2, 3. Here's what we're doing. 1, 2, 3. Here's why this matters. Here's why this matters. Here's why this matters. And then closing out with the future state again. That's kind of a simple structure that I think works in a lot of sales meetings. And when I say sales meetings, I mean even like project check-ins. You could even do this in a project check-in. If it's like Jira tickets, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You got to bring it back to where we're going, because I think they'll forget. And if the client forgets, sometimes that is when they will start to backpedal and not want to do what you think is best for them. And that's the thing. So it's some sort of delicate level of persuasion that I'm talking about here, where you keep it in front of them.
Right. Yeah. And you're getting buy-in early. So I think that's huge. And with the few minutes we have left, to do a little bit of a sidebar, what does the world of creative talent look like right now? Are the kids still going into the agency space? If not, where are they going? And if you could talk about your hiring process, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff changing post-COVID, as we know. A lot of stuff is changing, but I don't think that anything has died, right? I certainly know people are still looking for big agency jobs. I'm here in LA. There's a lot of people looking for industry jobs here at Netflix or equivalent. That is still happening, and I think people are still kind of choosing to go that route and jump into that career tenure track almost of the creative space. I think that's happening. Though I do feel that, like myself, I do think that a lot of creative people have an entrepreneurial side of them. And I think a lot of them are more comfortable now because of where we are with content creation. They're jumping into their own gigs more quickly. So I think the gig economy, though I don't have numbers to prove this right off the top of my head, it's big. And it's certainly not going anywhere where people are doing a lot of contract work. They're coming in and they're doing things that they really like. They're mixing up certain pieces of contracts that really inspire them at this younger age to do. So they're only doing things that they want to do. I think that's really big. And I think as people are interviewing for jobs, when you talk about looking for talent, I think that is what we're seeing for people coming out of school now, not to generalize it, but I believe that there's a feeling that this generation, at least in the creative space, wants to make a difference. They want to give back. They want to work on projects they really like. And that's often a question in the hiring process. They're not like how I came up, where it was more the grind culture, where you just did what you were told and you sort of figured it out. And then when you arrived, then you start to have an opinion, and that doesn't exist anymore. That's just, and I think that's good actually. But I think the people coming in now looking for a new job, they didn't grow up in that culture. They don't want the grind. They want to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And they want the opportunity to work on interesting stuff. So I think having a mix of that in their worldview is important. Having, not putting a new designer or a new creative person on just the grunt work, right? I think it's nice to infuse some visionary projects in there as well. So that's often how I've done it when I've had control over agency teams. We've giving them a little bit of a mix, right? So that they know that they're putting in their dues a bit on this thing that no one wants to do, honestly. But then also we're involving them as a collaborator on some big, interesting projects, because that's where the opportunities come from. So when you talk about the hiring process, I think that's what I look for. I'm always interested in, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What are you trying to create in your career? And I think I'm always asking that, whether it's hiring a contractor or whether it's hiring a full-time employee. I want to know that. I want to know what you want to make, what you want to do, where do you see yourself, and how do you see your creative talents fitting in? And not even fitting in, how do you see your creative talents reshaping what we're doing, and contributing? So using words like that in the interview process, I think, is really important, because they want to be seen as collaborators. Yeah. And I think that's changing in the industry as well. I'm not trying to make it an age thing. I'm just saying the younger generation, I think, is pushing the industry to change, because that hustle grind culture is hopefully maybe disappearing as people age out, because I think it's just not welcome anymore, where you work late hours with pay being low and you never see a light at the end of the tunnel. That's just not what anyone wants anymore. Or did they ever want it? Did they ever want it? But
yeah. And all just to end up in the industry, whatever that quote unquote the industry is, so that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure we could do a whole other episode on that. So Joey, this is a lot of fun. Where can people go to find out more about you, get in touch, and so on?
Yeah, definitely. I spun up a page for people directly on this podcast so I can reference things that we talked about. So it's going to be joeytackett.com. That's 2 T's, Tackett/agency growth. And I'll just drop some of the things that I mentioned here as well on there. And also I'll have a booking link there as well, because when I'm on any podcast like this, I realize there could be some things that come up if people want to do. We talked earlier about a strategy session around communications. So if you're a consultant or you're an agency owner and you're thinking, we need to optimize a little bit more, I'm using these calls completely complimentary just to help you identify some of those things. So not a lot of them, but I'll have that booking link on that page as well, because I want to help as many people as I can, because I think you have a good mix of agency people on here. And I think we all can improve our communication optimization. And I'm really eager to help people do that.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds really useful. And we'll get all that linked up. Joey, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.